This is a £1 coin, but what's it really worth? That might sound like a crazy thing to say, but there's a lot more to a coin than meets the eye. Every coin is worth both its face value, in this case, £1, but also the value of the materials from which it's made. In this case, that's nickel and brass, so not very much. I've come to the Royal Mint to learn about the difference between these two values and why it's very important that the coin has exactly the right weight of precious metal in it. I'll be looking at the times when the Mint got it right and when they got it very wrong, with catastrophic consequences. To ensure that the newly minted coins meet the required standards and are of the correct value, they're put through an annual judicial ceremony called the Trial of the Picks. The Trial of the Picks dates back to the 12th century and is held every February. A jury of over 6 assayers from the Company of Goldsmiths, independent from the Royal Mint, examines the coins. After the coins have been inspected and judged, the verdict is read aloud by the clerk of the Goldsmiths Company at the instruction of the senior master and King's Remembrancer, an ancient post created in 1154 by Henry II. Incredibly, this is the oldest judicial position in England still in existence. This verdict is received by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in their capacity as Master of the Mint. If the coinage is found to be substandard, the trial carries a punishment for the Master of the Mint, which could include a fine, removal from office, or even imprisonment. I'm asking Chris Barker, curator at the Royal Mint, about a famous incident when England's coinage failed the trial of the Picks. It failed under the guardianship of none other than Sir Isaac Newton, one of the most famous masters of the Royal Mint. In 1710, Newton's gold coins were found to be under fineness, they weren't the correct purity. This was something Newton was obviously furious about. The greatest mathematician and scientist in British history had supposedly gotten it badly wrong, but he was determined to prove otherwise. Newton was convinced his coins were good, and what he ultimately proved was that the Picks plate they were using from 1707 was actually the one with the wrong fineness. It had been made too fine, with a higher purity than intended. Newton challenged the ruling and won. As a result of his mathematical calculations, he demonstrated that the plate used to measure the coin's purity was incorrect. He was so proud of his findings that he kept the incorrect trial plate as proof. The plate was only used once before being discarded, and you can still see a small corner chopped off in the 1710 trial of the Picks, marking when it was found to be incorrect. Afterward, they reverted to the old trial plate from 1688, which had been used so much that it had been repeatedly cut down for testing over the years, leaving only a tiny remnant today. Newton was absolutely livid about the whole affair. He was deeply committed to the integrity and accuracy of the coinage, so it was no surprise that he fought so fiercely to defend it. While his scientific reputation was at stake, there was also a real risk, albeit small, of a fine or even theoretical imprisonment. The coinage Newton produced at the time included the guinea of Queen Anne, which had been found below standard during the trial of the Picks. As Newton learned, the trial of the Picks was crucial in ensuring that coins contained the correct amount of precious metal. But what happens to the economy when they don't? A great example of this can be found in the middle of the 16th century, during the reign of the infamous King Henry VIII. Chris explains the consequences of tampering with the purity of coins. It can cause huge economic problems, and a prime example is the Great Debasement. This was when Henry VIII officially watered down the coinage, comparable to watering down beer, by reducing the purity of gold and silver in coins. This was a massive problem because these coins relied on their intrinsic weight and precious metal content for their value. Unlike modern money, which is based on trust, these coins were valuable because of the material they contained. The mint was producing lower purity coins under Henry's orders so he could stretch his gold and silver supplies further. In the 1540s, he needed to fund his massive debts, especially from his costly wars in France. Henry VIII, best known for having 6 wives, was a man of excess. His lavish lifestyle, grand banquets, and relentless wars drained the treasury. The problem was that debasing the coinage undermined trust in English money. Both foreign and domestic merchants stopped accepting these coins, knowing they had been devalued. While debasement provided a short-term financial boost, it created long-term economic chaos. The problem compounded itself. Once debasement started, it had to continue to produce more money, leading to an ever-worsening spiral. By the end of Henry VIII's reign, England's currency was in crisis. The difference in coin quality was stark. At the start of his reign, coins like the fine gold angel were nearly pure gold, with a rich yellow color. But toward the end of his rule, heavily debased coins contained far more copper, giving them a reddish hue. This devaluation was impossible to hide. Any foreign merchant or creditor could see that the later coins were of lower purity, making them reluctant to accept English currency. Henry VIII's debasement was a short-term fix for a massive financial problem, but in the long run, it was a disaster. It was just one more example of Henry making reckless decisions that led to ruinous consequences. And, as a result, he earned himself a rather unfortunate nickname, one tied to his infamous manipulation of England's currency. What we have here is a whole series of testoons, an early form of the shilling. You can see quite clearly that these coins have a rather characterful appearance. However, they were debased, meaning a lot of copper was mixed into them, reducing their fineness and giving them a rough, reddish look. The public didn't want to accept them, so to make them more appealing, they were plated with a fine layer of silver to give them a nice, shiny finish. The problem with this was that the thin silver layer wore off over time, particularly on the highest points of relief on this portrait, that was the nose. As the silver wore away, the underlying copper became visible, and soon, Henry VIII's image on the coins began to show a red nose. This earned him the mocking nickname Old Copper Nose. Given his reckless financial policies, he probably deserved much worse. The situation created utter chaos, completely undermining trust in the English economic system, and it took many years before it was fully restored. Henry's reckless actions left England in financial ruin, and it was up to his daughter to fix it. After Henry VIII's death in 1547, England faced an uncertain royal succession. His son, Edward VI, took the throne, but since he was still a child, the country was governed by a regency council. Edward was briefly followed by Lady Jane Grey, the Nine-Day Queen, before Henry's daughter Mary I, later called Bloody Mary, took over. Finally, in 1558, another of Henry's daughters, Elizabeth I, inherited the throne. Along with the crown, she also inherited a struggling economy and a debased coinage system. It was Elizabeth who, in the 1560s, took on the immense task of restoring England's currency. Given that the debasement had started in the 1540s, it had taken decades to fix the problem. Elizabeth ordered that all of the debased, ugly coinage be recalled and recoined into high-quality gold and silver currency. The difference was striking. The new coins, like the magnificent sovereign of Elizabeth I, looked refined and dignified. You can see in this example the power and majesty she projected, seated on the throne, resembling Britannia herself. She restored the purity of England's coinage and, in doing so, brought back trust in the economy. It was one of her great successes as a ruler. Elizabeth even visited the mint to oversee the recoinage herself, and she personally struck some sovereigns, an extraordinary move for a monarch. Her reforms marked the end of a period of economic turmoil and laid the foundation for England's commercial expansion during her reign. The Great Debasement had done so much damage to England's reputation that, even after Elizabeth fixed the coinage, merchants remained cautious. Many conducted their own quality control checks to verify that the coins they traded with held their true value. Merchants and creditors simply couldn't trust coins blindly anymore. To check for debased currency, they used precise balancing scales. A gold sovereign, for example, was supposed to weigh a specific amount, and these scales allowed merchants to confirm its authenticity. Because England had lost its reputation for reliable coinage, traders had to weigh and inspect every single coin. Once trust is broken, it takes a long time to rebuild. Aside from scales, merchants also relied on detailed currency guides. Some of the earliest books in the museum's collection are 16th-century merchant guides, which listed the various currencies in circulation across Europe. If a merchant encountered an unfamiliar coin, they could look it up in their guide to check its origin, weight, and value. These beautifully illustrated books even included handwritten notes from merchants of the time. With so many different types of coins circulating, especially in places like Germany and France, these guides were essential. No one could possibly memorize all the variations, so these books provided a crucial reference. Merchants were always ahead of the game. You couldn't fool them, they would always find a way to verify a coin's value. Some coin-issuing authorities became particularly trusted over time. For example, the famous pieces of 8 Spanish silver coins were widely accepted and circulated across the world. Restoring faith in English coinage was essential for international trade, and Elizabeth's reforms set the stage for the British Empire's expansion. In later centuries, Britain's currency would be used across the globe, and people could trust its value. We've heard a lot about times when coins didn't contain enough precious metal, but what happens when there's too much? Next, we'll explore a case where coins were actually made with more gold than intended, leading to a very different kind of problem. What we have here is a tray of Edward III's gold coins. They're beautiful, aren't they? Incredible pieces, absolutely stunning. But this is where you actually run into a problem, and not the one you might expect. This time, it wasn't too little gold in the coins, it was too much. Yes, too much gold. The issue arose when Edward III introduced gold coinage in England for the first time, trying to catch up with his continental neighbors. This marked the beginning of regular gold coinage in English history, and Edward was the man responsible for it. However, keeping up with the neighbors required some trial and error, and his first attempt resulted in coins that contained too much gold relative to their face value. The problem was that these coins, like the leopard we see here, were actually worth more as raw gold than as currency. It made more financial sense to melt them down or trade them as bullion rather than to use them at face value. As a result, these coins quickly disappeared, melted down, hoarded, or sent back to the mint to be reissued with a corrected gold content. This is why almost none of these original leopard coins exist today. The mint was in chaos, everybody was melting the coins instead of using them in circulation. That's the last thing you want when running a nation's economy. Gold that had just been minted into coins was suddenly vanishing, often ending up in the hands of foreign merchants who melted them down for profit. It's the complete opposite of the situation today. Nowadays, coins contain almost no precious metal at all. Back then, they had too much. Today, there's no point in melting down your pennies, folks, definitely don't do it. Coins have always been a symbol of value, a way to store wealth or trade goods. But what I've learned today is that the most valuable thing of all isn't just the coins themselves, it's the process of making them right. Without a currency that people can trust, the entire economic foundation of a kingdom could collapse.